Hello and welcome to Florida Gators Live, episode 69, presented by FanDuel. And we have an exciting episode this week because the Gators have officially begun spring practice. Kind of an important checkpoint in the offseason that we've now finally reached. Some ball being played, some guys getting out on the grass, helmets on, not pads on just yet, but we'll get there. So a lot to talk about there. Going to be exciting. We'll get into that. We've also got some big updates on the recruiting front to get to from last week. Very excited to talk about that. And obviously we'll get into some hoops because Florida basketball, since we last talked, has clinched an outright SEC regular season championship for the first time since 2014. So we will get into all of that certainly. But before we do, I'm joined once again by Max Bernstein. And how's your week been, Max?
It's been good. Obviously, basketball was kind of the talk of the town this week with the performance they had against Arkansas, giving John Calipari his tied for his worst loss as a head coach, which is pretty unbelievable. And also just how that team has been performing, solidifying themselves really as an undisputed top 5 team in the country right now. Which we've been talking about them getting to that point, and now to see them at that point, it's been very, very interesting. They look like they're destined for another deep run, and like you said, football spring season finally here. We've been waiting. It's highly anticipated to see how this team will perform and also how they will operate under John Summerall. And early indications are we could take away some things. We'll go into that, but very exciting time right now just for UF athletics as a whole.
Certainly is an exciting time. I mean, like you said, basketball teams now won 10 games in a row. They could be, and we'll talk about this, we'll get into it. All of a sudden, a 1 seed doesn't look like such a pipe dream. It looks like something that actually could potentially happen if things break the right way. So, a lot to get to there. But before we do, we should talk about the fact that Florida had a major update on the recruiting front with one of their top targets this cycle. This is a guy we've talked about a lot. It's none other than Maxwell Hiller, the 5-star interior offensive lineman from Coatesville, Pennsylvania. So this is a guy that Florida's made, I would say their number one priority, it seems to me, in this 2027 class. They had him on campus in January. At the time, he said that visit really cemented things for Florida. I think you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think he even kind of hesitantly named Florida as a leader a couple weeks back. So that happened. And then just last week, he received a crystal ball to Florida from 247 Sports. So that would be absolutely huge. Hiller, a top 5 overall prospect, number 1 interior offensive lineman. And I mean, you don't necessarily see interior guys. You'll see 5-star interior linemen. You don't necessarily see 5-star interior linemen like pushing top 5 nationally. So I think really speaks to the caliber of prospect that he is. Obviously, we've gone into it in depth, his ties with Phil Troutwine. Being a Pennsylvania kid, he was getting recruited while Troutwine was at Penn State. Now, obviously, Florida, Troutwine's going after him with Florida, and he's got some other official visits set, obviously one to Florida in June as well. But it seems like the Gators are in a prime position right now to land him.
Absolutely. A crystal ball, like you kind of touched on it's a little surprising this early for a guy that we did talk when we talked about him. We kind of talked about how his recruiting timeline was a little bit ahead, and we wouldn't be surprised to see him commit to somewhere before the season started. But now Florida looks like the leader in the doghouse, which is very, very interesting. It could be, a massive get. Obviously, just in terms of rating and stars here, he'd be the biggest recruit since DJ Lagway for Florida. And obviously, some Florida fans hoping this goes a little bit different. But at the offensive line position, I feel like being a 5-star, especially on the interior, like you said, you're kind of more of a sure thing in a way. It's very rare you see 5-star interior linemen, and that when you do, those 5-star interior linemen really make an impact usually from day one. And we talked about this is a player who would be fast tracked probably into some playing time, and I think he sees that opportunity at Florida more than maybe he would at an Alabama, which was the other team we were kind of discussing as like maybe the other team to watch, a team that's been really hot on his trails throughout his entire process. But yeah, a top 5 player in the country, no matter how you slice it, a just a blue chip prospect, and someone that if Florida were to land a 5-star, often a top 5 player in the country early on in the cycle, before John Summerall's team even touches the field, before he even coaches a game as a Florida player, that would be a huge statement for this program, for John Summerall, what he has brought to this program before they've even touched the field. And honestly, this is a guy too, you have to kind of, if he commits early, you're going to still have to fend off some programs. I mean, of course, no one's just going to be like, all right, he's locked. But if Florida could have some more success on the field, which I mean, I think we're both hopeful for that, a guy that I feel like could just be a cornerstone of this team for so many years. And to have that crystal ball, obviously it's nothing certain, but it's a very good indicator that, Maxwell Hiller might be a Florida Gator.
Yeah, it's especially, I think, a good indication this early on. Like, this is something we were just talking about off air, but like, I don't think either of us were really expecting, this kind of projection this early, especially just because it's such a, hotly contested recruitment. I mean, like we said, he's coming to Florida June 19th. He's also got official visits set for Alabama and Tennessee.
Tennessee.
I was blanking. Yep. Yeah, I was blanking on what the other one was. And Ohio State's also in his top 4. So, there's certainly competition there. And, it's not going to be, like you said, one of these things where he commits to Florida, maybe, I mean, I kind of doubt he makes a commitment before that run of official visits, but, Florida right now, I believe it is his last scheduled official visit. So wouldn't necessarily be surprised to see a commitment maybe soon after that, once he kind of wraps up that slate of visits. But yeah, obviously that's not the end of things. That's never the end of things these days. Although I do think it's there's a little bit more finality to it maybe than there used to be when guys committed. I don't think you see necessarily as much of a rush of flips, maybe more so for like quarterbacks, but that's partially because I think quarterback situations are just so fluid with the transfer portal. Things can change really fast. I don't think that's necessarily as true for positions like interior offensive line. Also worth noting that he's kind of viewed as a guy with the versatility to potentially play at tackle as well. So that's probably part of the reason he's ranked highly. And, he's like listed like 6'5.5", 305. So kind of, at that range where you could maybe see it either way, probably more likely to at least be an instant impact on the interior, I would say. So, yeah, I mean, certainly, like you don't see it very often with offensive linemen just because a lot of times they need to kind of do some body transformation and just get better before they're capable of seeing real reps in the SEC. This might be a case where, you could probably see the field pretty early if Florida were to land Maxwell Hiller. So, yeah, I mean, and I think what you said was such a good point, too, because you'd be landing him with more or less zero proof of concept, because I think, that was, I think, the thing that, I don't want to say the cope because I think there was some truth to it, but I think that was kind of the thing, when Billy Napier's recruiting was like at a good but not elite level. I think that was kind of the thing people believed was, to make that jump to that next level, Florida's going to kind of have to show it on the field. Well, I mean, not that one guy makes a recruiting class, but Florida hasn't landed a 5-star offensive lineman in it'll be 12 years because it was the 2015 class with Martez Ivey. So, it gets to a point where if Summerall can come in and do this, sight unseen year one, I think that says a lot about, this staff's recruiting prowess, and obviously Phil Troutwine specifically, because I think he's maybe pound for pound the best recruiter on staff. I think that's why you hired him. You hired him because of his track record of both recruitment and development at Penn State. And if he's able to go into Pennsylvania and get a 5-star guy that Ohio State wants, that Alabama wants, I think that would speak volumes.
Absolutely. While you were speaking, I did a little bit of research on when was the last time an interior offensive line guy was top 10 in the 247 composite. Obviously, there's a lot of time for that to change, but it was 2022. It was DJ Campbell of Texas,
Mm.
who is going to get drafted this year. And then you look at the other 5-star interior offensive linemen since then, there's only been two other ones. You've got one from 2 years ago's class, Michael Carroll of Alabama, who played in every game this season as a true freshman. And then Oregon landed one in this past cycle in Emmanuel Iniacho. And the thing that those guys all have that, like you talked about, is that positional versatility where they could bend out to tackle. And I think that is a big reason of why these guys were rated so highly. And another reason why, obviously having an elite guard is a great thing, but when you've got, a tackle, that's like the cornerstone of your offensive line, like is a blindside guy or, an elite tackle protector. And there's a reason tackles go higher in the draft and they get paid more and all that. So, you know, obviously not to say he's not going to stick at guard, but if he did come, I mean, obviously there'd be conversations to see, how I don't know the exact measurements of his arms, but if they're long enough to play a tackle or anything like that. But like you mentioned, Phil Troutwine has just really made Florida this program to watch on pretty much any offensive lineman in the country because he's shown this development track record. He's shown he can help these players reach the NFL, become first round draft picks. So when you're a recruit and you're looking at that, it's like, wow, this is a guy I know I can trust as my position coach. And he seems like he's pretty settled at Florida. Like this isn't a guy who's just coming to Florida all willy-nilly and like, oh, I just want to come back, for a cup of coffee at my old school. Like he wants to be here. He left a very secure job at Penn State to come here because he believes in this program and he wants to help this program. So, I mean, I think the faith that these recruits are going to have in him, and also like a guy like Maxwell Hiller might have, is really what's putting Florida over the line on some of these guys. And I mean, again, like we've mentioned, the proof of concept, you kind of throw that all out, and it's like, wow, like this would be just, I don't think words can even describe how big of a get this would be for the Gators.
No doubt. You talk about arm length. I mean, recent history has indicated that you can have short arms and be a top 5 tackle pick in the NFL. Results not guaranteed. But no, I mean, yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it's just, it's rare in recruiting that you can kind of just singularly give the credit to like a position coach. I mean, a lot of times they play a major role in these recruitments, but there's a million factors that lead to a guy choosing one school over another. But like, to me, this is a case where I think you can pretty much hand this one all the way to Phil Troutwine if Florida gets this one over the finish line, because I mean, again, a guy from Pennsylvania, I probably is getting crystal balls for Penn State right about now if things don't go south with James Franklin. So, or at least, could very easily see that happening. So, not a guy who certainly was really giving Florida the time of day before bringing Troutwine in. So, yeah, I mean, it would be so huge. And I think, it just shows, this was a guy that Florida fans have really wanted for a long time. And, I think he's probably wanted to take this job too. I think this was just a situation where the timing kind of worked out, where Florida had the opening and there was uncertainty, with his future at Penn State. They obviously, they were late, kind of late in the process hiring coach too. So, his position wasn't necessarily secure moving forward, though I'm sure. I mean, I guess I don't know this for a fact, but I have a hard time believing Matt Campbell would not have wanted Phil Troutwine to stick around if he was open to doing that. So, yeah, I mean, obviously we'll see how it plays out in a lot of time to still go. And, despite this early crystal ball, I wouldn't necessarily expect a decision to be made before he takes his run of official visits in the summer. But, who knows? It's possible. And either way, I think, he's been really transparent about where Florida stands. I mean, like I said, he went on, I can't remember whose it was, but he was on someone's podcast talking about the Gators. And yeah, like he basically was just like, yeah, I'd probably, give Florida the nod. So certainly transparent about how much he enjoys being down here, how much he believes in the staff and Troutwine specifically. So Yeah, I think Florida's in a great spot, but obviously not over yet. Things can change fast here.
Yeah, one more point I just want to make, and
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of just veers a little bit here, but we talked about Hiller's basketball background a little bit last time. His younger brother Colton is a
Yeah.
top 3 player in the 2028 class, and I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I think that we could get a 2-for-1 here. That'd be great. That'd be a great move. If I'm sure there'd be some conversation about that, but no, obviously, looking just ahead for now. Um, I think, like you said, Phil Troutwine has established himself as one of the best offensive line coaches in the country. There's no debate about that, and you know him him coming to Florida was just such a huge get. I think it speaks to John Summerall's ability to understand, like, okay, we have the assets here, like we have the resources, but we need the right people to find the right people. Because, like we've talked about, it's not unlimited resources. Of course, it's good resources. But we're not Texas at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so how can you better allocate your resources? And that kind of goes to, like, in his contract, like when going through that, the budget that he was given for assistant coaches of something around like 16 million, like for like the whole staff. The investment into that by the Florida uh, athletic program and by the boosters and whoever else is involved in that, I think was a very good move, and I think will pay dividends. It's already starting to, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if Florida's back in the top 10 of the recruiting this year, especially if they land a bona fide 5-star top guy.
Yeah, I mean, that would be certainly a great start. And, obviously we've talked about some other guys. He's not the only one Florida's gotten a projection for. Last week we talked about Frederick Ards, I think top one. He's either borderline top 100 or is top 100. I'm pretty sure he's top 100. Defensive end who, has Florida's gotten a projection for as well. So, we've talked a lot about these guys in the last few weeks, the guys that have set officials for the summer. Obviously not going to get all of them, but if you get just a handful of them, you're setting yourself up with a pretty nice base of talent, because a lot of those guys are, like I just said, either top 100 or like borderline top 100 guys. But obviously getting Hiller would be absolutely phenomenal. And, I'd say, yeah, maybe other than DJ Lagway, just because of the significance of that with a quarterback, the biggest win Florida's had on the recruiting trail in a really long time. So that will certainly be interesting to see as we progress into the summer. But so if you're watching this, whether you're watching this or whether you're listening to the audio, we really appreciate you joining us here. But we also want to hear from you. We want you to be a part of the conversation. Now, Voice of College Football is all new on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. We want to hear from you. We're going to be starting some dialogue. So join our ongoing conversation about the game that we all love, because there is no off season here at the Voice of College Football. So be sure to check us out on Twitter at the VOCFB. And we're really excited to hear from you and hear what you think about this sport that we love to consume together. Oops. Also, as I just said, whether you're listening on audio or watching on video, because we know a lot of you are, watch this on video, whether it's, live with us, and we really appreciate you guys, or after the fact. Either way, it's great. But if you're on the go or you want to, catch us elsewhere, you can also get our show in audio format. We're on pretty much everywhere you could possibly want to listen to a podcast. So wherever your favorite audio platform is, whether that's Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, we got you. We're all there for that one. So please check us out in audio form if that's more your thing than video. We get it. But yeah, so kind of continuing on with some, I guess if you want to call it, housekeeping of Florida sports. Obviously, the basketball team just on an absolute tear right now. I mean, 10-game winning streak. The 2 games since we talked, they won 111-77 against Arkansas at home. And then on sorry, last night they win on the also at home, sorry, against Mississippi State 108-74. So back-to-back 100-point games. First time an SEC team has scored 100 points 3 times in SEC play. I can't remember the exact year. It's been a long time, I'm pretty sure. So this team is just on an absolute heater right now. And, we talked about it last week and said, hey, 1 seed probably not going to happen. Now it's pretty doable, I think, because you look at the metrics and Florida's should be a 1 seed by all the metrics. It's a 2-team race between Florida and UConn at this point. I think the top 3 of Michigan, Duke, Arizona, that's pretty locked in. But then beyond that, I think between Florida and UConn, you get a really interesting question. I mean, Florida's stacked a lot more quad 1 wins, in part because the Big East is kind of down this year. I think the issue Florida might just have here is, and I'm not sure UConn's going to lose, and they might need UConn to lose to St. John's in the Big East tournament, who they split with in the regular season, just because despite the metrics, most people have UConn in that spot right now, and UConn has the head-to-head. I think that's the really complicating factor. I think it's kind of toss-up-ish right now, and I would kind of expect they're going to defer to that head-to-head if push comes to shove there. Again, assuming UConn doesn't lose again.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the Miami Notre Dame argument a little bit here. I mean, I thought Notre Dame looked like the better team at points last season, but Miami beat them. And at the end of the day, you kind of have to respect that. I know it's different, obviously, more games. And UConn has that quad 3 loss to Creighton. Florida's only non-quad 1 loss was to Auburn. But I think, obviously, metrically, Florida is the better team. They've looked like the better team. They've played like the better team. They've handled business like the better team. And I think, at the end of the day, the 1 seed would be great. I don't know if it really has a huge impact, because the difference between playing a 7 and playing an 8, I don't care about the seeding line. I care about the team. I don't want to see Wisconsin. I'm good. I don't want a team that can upset, has shown they can upset a big team. But you never know who you're going to play against. That's the thing about March Madness is you can speculate all you want. Oh, we want this seed, we want that seed, but it just matters who you're up against, and you just have to take it game by game. Then Florida was put in a pretty difficult situation last year, having UConn as in that 8-9 game. And it was okay, Florida might have to play UConn in the second round. That's not an easy game. Turned out it was not an easy game, but you could only play who's ahead of you, just like UConn could only play who's on their Big East schedule. They are 27-3. Their losses, to St. John's, to Arizona, and then the loss to Creighton. So, I mean, we're talking about 2 of the top 5 teams in the country right now, and whatever way you slice it. Personally, I mean, just looking at the metrics, and I'm someone who believes in them, Florida's been the better team. And especially as of late, since Florida last lost that game, only them, Navy, and Miami, Ohio have not lost in the entire country.
I actually didn't know that.
So, and obviously Miami, Ohio hasn't lost a game, but, whatever you want to say about that. But, Duke's lost a game. We saw them. It might have been on a buzzer beater, but Duke lost a game. So, yeah, I just think the job, the players spoke about this in the post-game presser against Arkansas. Thomas Houck spoke about how the faith in the team never really wavered, even with that rough start. It was we know who we are. We played hard teams and we got to challenge ourselves, and that made us better. We understood what our weaknesses were. And I thought yesterday, without Tommy, a lot of guys stepped up. I thought CJ Ingram looked great in the minutes he got. I'm excited to see. It's kind of like last year when you were starting to get flashes of Tommy as the season went on. It was okay, that's Isaiah Brown. Next year, he's going to step up into that role, into one of those roles. So they've just built a great foundation of a program. a winning program. They've accomplished everything you want to accomplish over the last 2 seasons. They've now won an SEC regular season, an SEC championship, and they've won a national championship. So really just an unbelievable coaching job by Todd Golden. The players have stepped up. And right now, I think a lot of teams would be scared to play this Florida team. I know, this is not a team you want to see in March. That's for sure.
No doubt. And I'm glad you mentioned Hauk didn't play yesterday. I forgot to bring that up. Yeah, Florida did that to Mississippi State without its all SEC player or first team all SEC player in Thomas Hauk. Yeah, I mean, because he tweaked his ankle in the Arkansas game. He finished the game. They said it was precautionary that he sat out yesterday and not due to the ankle. Not exactly sure what that means. But Todd also said he's expected to play on Saturday against Kentucky. So obviously, we'll see. There's something maybe not a situation to monitor, but just something to keep an eye on here down the stretch. But yeah, I mean, the way this team is playing is truly unbelievable. Whether it ends up getting back to the 1 seed line, which would be, I mean, I think it's probably like more likely than not that Florida stays on the 2. But if this team were to get back to the 1 seed line with everything it lost, with the way it started the year, I mean, that, like, when I say that'd be unbelievable, I truly mean, like, I would have never believed that if you told me that, at the start of January. So, because I mean, this team was what, 5-4 to start the season?
Yeah, 5-4.
Yes. I mean, that's crazy. Yeah, you're right. No one wants to play this team. And on the seeding front, like, I think that's also a good point that it really depends on the draw you get. Like, for example, I just pulled up Joe Lunardi's latest bracketology. Like, he has Miami on the 8 seed line and he has Villanova on the 7 seed line. I would much rather play Villanova than Miami. The way Miami's playing right now, and also just Villanova's lack of size, I think that's a significantly better matchup for the Gators. So again, really just depends on, sort of where, what the draw is. And either way, it's probably going to be the same regional draw because, either UConn's going to be the last 1 seed or the first 2 seed, and they're probably going to end up paired in the same region together. And that's probably set to be the South region either way, because the other regions are East, Midwest, and West, and the other 1 seeds are Duke, Michigan, and Arizona. So I think Florida's locked into the same. Like, I think the only question is like the order with which you play the teams, because I think ultimately your path is going to be roughly the same, whether they end up capping it off and getting a 2 seed or getting a 1 seed, or remaining at the 2 seed line. But I mean, it seems crazy. They're shooting, I think, 36%, or shot 36% from 3 in February, have continued to shoot the 3 ball well. I mean, that was the thing. That was like the one thing where, we said if Florida gets better at this, they're going to be an absolute hell to try to stop. And that's the reality we're currently living in. They are an absolute hell to try to stop. And defensively, the way they're playing, I mean, Acuff was more or less a non-factor on Saturday for Arkansas. I mean, he scored 17, I think, but like, that's nothing for him. I mean, he was on a streak of 5 straight 20-plus point games or something like that.
I think it was more. Yeah, it was. And I was about to make the exact same point. I have it up right here. Since Florida lost, they're shooting 37% from the 3-point line since the Auburn game.
Yeah, I mean, unbelievable.
That's 85th in the country. That is good enough. That is good enough. And they're still 3rd in offensive rebounding. They're 2nd in adjusted defense, 5th in adjusted offense. Like, this team has just hit it at the right time. It's like, I mentioned this before the show started, but it's like kind of the scary part of like, okay, like, do you want a loss before the tournament starts? Because like, are you going to win 18 straight games? It's a hard thing to do. Obviously Florida had the loss to Georgia, which was later than the Auburn loss was this year. But I mean, my tune has changed a little bit here. On Florida, I think for a lot of people, there were points early in the season, or like even in January, where I was like, this team's like getting bounced in the Sweet 16. They're going to go cold one night, and someone's going to be physical and just neutralize them. But I mean, I can't say that same thing anymore. I'd be really surprised if this team doesn't make a run, just based on how they've played, how good they are at every aspect of basketball right now. Like there's not a weakness right now. It was the shooting. It's not a weakness. You've got 7, 8, 9 guys if you really want to stretch it out that you'd feel comfortable playing at this point. So just an unbelievable turnaround by this team. I think I said this last week. This is a more impressive coaching job by Todd Golden than what he did last season, in my opinion. I think he has done such a fantastic job with this team, even during that slow start, like figuring out, okay, how do we get better? I know the SEC has been worse this year, but like the gap between Florida and Bama right now as the second best SEC team, like it's unbelievable, that gap. It's a ridiculous gap.
Yeah, I mean, totally. And I think on that point about the coaching job, I mean, this is something we talked about before, but like, last year's team was really Walt dependent. Like, Florida pretty much needed Walt. He wasn't great in the national title game, but that was just a kind of a different beast of a game overall, just how, it was completely played on Houston's terms, low scoring, defensive. But I mean, for the most part in that tournament, if Walt hadn't gotten hot in any one of those games, it would have been game over for Florida there. There isn't that guy on this team. There's not a, I mean, Condon obviously is playing out of his mind. I think he's played his way out of any chance of coming back to Gainesville next year. Unfortunately, I guess if you want to look at it that way, but he dropped 26 yesterday. I mean, he's playing, I think, the best basketball of his career. With all that being said, he can have a bad night, and that doesn't really fundamentally change, the challenge you're facing with this team, because there's just so many guys that can step in. I mean, last night alone, it was 6 guys in double figures, and then Brown had 9 and Ingram had 8. So, I mean, and Ingram, yeah, like you said, came in, hit, popped 2 quick threes coming off the bench. Everyone's hitting threes. Cooper Josephsberg hit a 3 last night. Everyone's hitting threes. So, and that was great. The way the shot of the bench when Cooper hit that 3 was incredible.
Awesome.
Condon, I wouldn't be very happy if I was the assistant whose back Condon's jumping on. I'm like, dude, you're 6'10", brother. Like, you can't be doing that.
That was awesome. And you said the 6 guys who scored it. They had 7 guys for the second time in program history. 7 guys scored in double figures against Arkansas.
Yeah,
like that's unbelievable. I was sitting in press in that game, and the guy sitting next to me was like, "Oh, Boogie needs 2 more points. Do you think he knows?" I go, "I'm sure Boogie knows that. Like they know they want to get to the double. He definitely wanted to get to the double figures against Arkansas." But yeah, listen, FanDuel agrees. Florida is plus 800 to win the national championship, which is the 4th best odds. They're plus 140 to make the Final Four. So that's basically almost a toss-up to make the Final Four. And they're well ahead of UConn in those odds right now. So FanDuel sees Florida as the 4th best team in the country, at least in terms of odds. So definitely an interesting path, because I think if you took Florida 2 months ago, you probably would have gotten some pretty good odds on them to win the national championship or on them to make the Final Four. I know a guy with 2 thumbs that's on this show that might have sprinkled $1 on them to win the SEC after the Missouri game, and that guy's pretty happy right now.
Yeah.
So can't complain. What a time for Gators basketball.
Yeah, just a real quick note on that. Is this staff aware of stats and records? The answer is yes, because last night alone, they kept Rubin in the game until he scored 11, because in doing so, he set the program record for single season double-double, or I think single season. Was it career or single season double-doubles? Yeah, single season double-doubles. It was he said it was 16, so I'm pretty sure that's how many double-doubles he has this year.
He has a lot. I've almost lost count on how many double-doubles this guy's had.
So he stayed in. Yeah, he's been crazy. But so he stayed in, and he has what?
It was his 18th.
18th. Okay.
Yeah,
that's right.
Which is
That's
Crazy.
an unbelievable number.
And then Todd Golden getting his 100th win too. So
Todd getting his 100th win, and then Micah. He kept Micah in the game until Micah got a bucket to score to get be in double figures, which I don't know how many times that has happened. It's not the first time that's happened, but I don't think it's happened a ton of times in the time Mike has been here. Almost had a double-double. He went 10 and 9. So Florida almost had 2 guys with double-doubles, and Condon was only a couple 3 boards away too. So I mean, there's just no clear path to beating this team. You know, you need a lot of things to go right. You need them to have a bad game shooting. You need the turnovers to be a problem, which they've been at times, but they weren't last night. Only had 5. Florida won the rebounding battle by 27. So, I mean, like when they're doing that, there's really just nothing that you can do. I mean, Mississippi State did what they could do. They jumped out to a 24-14 lead. They were shooting, I think, 10 of 13 to start the game. And then Florida went on an 18-0 run and ended up taking a 12-point lead at half. And then just ran away with it in the second half. But yeah, I mean, it really is. I mean, I didn't think we'd be here talking about this team as another national championship. I mean, I'm with you. I was like, I think this team could, for a while, I thought this team like could get hot and make like an Elite 8 run. But I thought it was probably more likely that they'd run into a team that didn't just let themselves get bullied in the paint in the Sweet 16 and then Florida goes cold and it's over. I don't really think that anymore. I mean, I think the Sweet 16 is probably the earliest you would run into a team that I would say like could really challenge Florida unless they just have a really off night. And that might be too early to even say that. It might be even deeper in the tournament than that. So really, really impressive. Excited to see what happens. Close out the regular season on the road against Kentucky at Rupp, where Florida hasn't. When was the last time Florida won at Rupp? It's been a minute. Do you know off the top of your head?
I don't. Well, let's
because they didn't last year.
No, it's definitely been some time.
Yeah, it's been at least. I think Mike White did it at the tail end at some point. Okay, it actually wasn't that long ago. Florida did it.
It wasn't. They did it 2 years ago. Well,
that was their first time doing it since 2021.
Yes, and then they had the couple wins in the early Mike White. Obviously late Donovan years, but again, Rupp, hard place to play. But I mean, it's not. You could beat Kentucky and Rupp. It's happened especially a couple times. Yeah. It seems like Kentucky is like I thought Joe Lenardi was about to like start cursing them out during the halftime yesterday because he was like, I don't understand this team. I don't know how they can do this.
Yeah, they got schooled by Texas A&M yesterday.
Who has not looked good.
No, they're kind of collapsing.
Yeah, so
that's 2 teams, by the way, that have staved off collapse against them because they lost to Auburn as well in the midst of Auburn's terrible collapsing streak. So yeah, I mean, this team is not that good. They gave Florida a pretty nice battle in Gainesville, and I expect they probably will here too. I don't really think Florida's going to run away with this one. I mean, especially because, there are kind of competing motivations here. I honestly, I wouldn't have been shocked if he decided to maybe rest Houck again in this game, just because, you have already locked up the SEC outright. You've already locked up the 1 seed in the tournament. But obviously I think this team's playing to get back on that 1 seed line again this year. And, I think if they win this game, I think they're in a good position to do it either way, because I'm not sure the conference tournament really matters. So I don't think, put it this way. If Florida were to lose in the SEC championship, win on Saturday, but lose in the SEC championship, and they end up on the 2 seed line, I think they were going to be on the 2 seed line either way. I don't think it was because they lost that game.
I think we've seen the precedent that conference tournaments, teams are kind of locked in at least. I don't think there's a world where Florida could really drop below a 2. It would probably take them losing badly to Kentucky, badly in their first game in the SEC tournament. But
it helps too that the other 2s have just not played very good basketball recently.
No, outside of even Houston has struggled, and then right now it's Michigan.
They lost 3 in a row. They lost 3 in a
Yeah,
row, like, a couple weeks early over the last
and
couple weeks. Yeah.
and Michigan State, like, has picked it up as of late, but they're, like they dropped before Florida would. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think pretty secure at a 2. Looking for that one, if I had to guess, probably not, just because I don't
Yeah.
really see UConn losing, and even if UConn lost a game, I don't know if that's would be enough.
That's the thing. In light of what we just said about conference tournaments not mattering, like if Florida wins the SEC and UConn gets bounced by St. John's, like does that really matter? I don't know. I don't
I
know.
I would guess no. Just,
Yeah.
like, at the end of the day, like, it was in December, UConn did beat Florida on a neutral site. I mean,
On a neutral site
neutral site, but
by
it
1 point. But yeah, yeah.
the game happened. So,
Yeah.
unfortunately, you can't just act like, it's a stupid argument, but it's the one that the committee would probably make. So, does it matter at the end of the day if they're in the same region? No.
No. No, I don't think so. So that will certainly be a lot of fun over the next couple of weeks. Obviously, Florida going to be in Nashville trying to run it back as SEC tournament champions and win both also for the first time since 2014 that they hadn't won either before last year since 2014. Now they obviously won the tournament last year, now have the regular season. Let's see if they can capture another tournament championship. They're not the only Florida team that I'm fairly optimistic about the way things are going right now. Baseball team is currently on a 13-game winning streak. Is that right? 13 games?
A lot of games
Yeah.
when we
Again,
started.
same as we said with softball last week. A lot.
Yeah, and well,
Yeah.
one of those streaks might have ended, but
Yeah.
I think at this point of the season, I think a sweep, if you want to call it that, over Miami obviously only ended up being
Huge.
2 games, but I mean that proved a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Slow start today against Florida A&M, but they're up four
What's the
to
score
two
right
now,
now?
4-2.
Oh, they did.
So
Okay. Okay.
yeah, so they've kind of done that a couple times this season, just with a couple slow starts, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, I think again at a much better place this season than they were last season at this time. Um, a top 10 team in the country right now. Softball up there as well, like second or third in every run scoring statistic, like only behind Oklahoma pretty much. They lost to UCLA in in basically a road game.
Yeah.
And it was high scoring and it was close. And Keegan Rothrock with an off night, which doesn't happen very much. So, there was a little bit of concern that Ava Brown might have went down with a bad injury, but it seems like she's all right. So good news there for Florida, and they continue to just keep playing well, and we'll see. I mean, obviously, SEC play for both of these teams will say a lot, but right now, the bat and ball sports, as you like to say,
Yeah.
have looked good.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, softball had the week off in terms of non-conference games after their road trip to Fullerton, but they're back and they are hosting Missouri to kick off SEC play this weekend. So that will be exciting. But yeah, on the baseball front, we'll see if they win tonight. It is 12-game winning streak, by the way. They're 12-1, haven't lost since the opener. And I mean, really, aside from that one game in which Liam was not very good at all, Liam Peterson, I think you've got a lot of, there's a lot to be really excited about, I think, here, because I think you're getting a lot of consistent production out of the lineup. Like you just said, we've had some situations here where Florida's fallen behind early in games to start the year, but they are pretty much always, putting up enough runs to where they're able to overcome it pretty easily. And then I think you're getting a lot of consistency out of the pitching staff. I mean, Liam's turned in 2 good starts since his bad opening start. And then I still don't think Aiden King's allowed an earned run this year. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the case.
It's ridiculous.
And then even Cooper Walls, who we didn't get to see pitch on Sunday, pitched an abbreviated start last night against FAU, and was pretty good. I think he only had like 2 hits, no runs or anything. So pretty solid there. But yeah, I mean, I think you've seen some good work out of the bullpen, because Aiden King on Saturday against Miami got pulled prematurely. He was pitching well, but got pulled in the third, I believe, was had something bothering him with his finger. It doesn't seem like it's a serious deal. But because of that, Florida had to have kind of an extended bullpen game there, and those guys really held it down nicely. So, I mean, I think the starting pitching is getting more consistent. I think the bullpen has shown some promise, and I think you have maybe a lineup that doesn't have like a ton of star power outside of like Brennan Lawson, but I think has, is pretty, solid from top to bottom.
I would agree. I mean, just a really good start by the baseball team. And like you said, the lineup, which was kind of like a lot of people's questions going into the year, has answered some of those questions. So we'll see. I mean, obviously a lot of time left in the season there, but good starts for both sides.
Absolutely. But I think that's enough talk about non-football sports because we actually finally have some, I was about to say honest to God football to talk about. Not exactly, but we have some football adjacent activity to talk about because the Gators began their spring practice yesterday. Was the first practice, I believe, right? Yesterday?
Yesterday.
Yeah. So, obviously not a lot you can, glean from this so far. It's a lot of just routes on air, at least in terms of what the media is privy to. And that's kind of how it goes, especially in these early practices. But I think it interesting, like it kind of sparked an interesting discussion and thought that I kind of wanted to get into because I always find, obviously spring's really exciting. It's just fun to kind of see the new team out on the field all together, see how everyone looks, see kind of how guys have already started transforming their bodies with off-season workouts, that kind of thing. But I think it's always kind of difficult for me to like figure out, and just I think for fans in general, like what can you parse from spring practice? Because obviously it's tough there, because again, there's a lot of stuff they're not privy to. The stuff the media is privy to is typically not really things you can glean a lot from. So it's kind of going off of, what coaches are saying, what kind of personnel is being used, who like from what you can see, who's repping with the ones, who's repping with the twos, all that good stuff. So I thought it'd kind of be interesting to get into like, what can we, what will we learn this spring practice, or at least what could we potentially learn? And then like, to go along with that, what things are we probably not going to learn until we get further along into fall camp in August and really maybe even into the start of the season. So I'm kind of curious, like, where would you like to start there? Like, what's something that you think Florida might actually, Florida fans might actually be able to kind of learn from this month or two here?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is that this is going to be a more transparent team. Which you talked a little bit about how like in the past it was like we'd get like 5 minutes of practice to watch, and it was like you'd stretch and a little bit of air routes. There was an extended period of about 30 to 40 minutes.
Wow.
Yes, I mean obviously they're not showing us
Sure.
everything, but there
That's a
was a
change
lot.
though. That's
There
that's
was a
not typical.
it is a change.
Yeah.
And then in the press conference, Sean Summerall like outlined 12 players. Like was like this player, like Dallas Wilson had a thing on his foot. Like if we had to play this weekend, he would play, but we're just being cautious. I
Mhm.
think the just being honest, it's very refreshing. It's
Yeah.
kind of new. It's definitely a change of pace, but I feel like it's I mean, this is what it really should be like. Like,
Yeah.
what's the point? Everyone has injuries. Everybody has problems at this point in the season. So when the season's so far away, so I've just been really surprised, just from an overall standpoint, and pleasantly surprised about the overall transparency and also just that as a whole. But in terms of on the field stuff, just from what we saw a little bit, like the offense style, we've kind of touched on that when we went over the running backs and the receivers, because we were saying, some people thought this would be more of an air raid style offense. But we've kind of hypothesized that it's going to be kind of a mix. Um, you know, Definitely some pro style stuff utilizing Jaden Ball while you have him. I think that's where we're trending. I think we're going to get more of a view of that, especially in the orange and blue game. whatever kind of formations we see, who they're putting out there, what they're running. Obviously, they're not going to throw the book out there, but you get a pretty good indication of like, okay, they're comfortable running this right now at this point. So I think that's something we're definitely going to see. And as practice develops, a little bit more insight onto that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to get into that because I think that's a really interesting point. But just real quick before we get on that, going back to the injuries thing, yeah, that was really interesting to me. That's something I also noticed listening to Summerall's presser on Monday, whenever that was. I think that was Monday. Yeah, I guess that's a pretty big departure from how the previous staff handled things. I mean, if I recall correctly, Billy Napier wouldn't even get into specific, like, let alone, you're not even talking about a prognosis. Billy Napier would, he would say upper body injury, lower body injury. Like, he was very intentionally vague, which, like, I'm not trying to be too critical of that. I think that's kind of an understandable impulse. And it's kind of historically how these things were handled in college. But I think that's kind of not the direction things are heading in. I think things are heading in a more transparent direction. I think, with gambling, I mean, if you want to know why the SEC injury reports exist now, it's because of gambling. It's, to at least attempt to curb gambling within the building. Whether that does the job, I don't know. But it certainly was done with that intent. And I think just in general, the further professionalization of the sport, because I mean, this isn't a problem in the NFL. The NFL, they'll tell you, did a guy practice? How much did he practice? Was he a full participant in practice? Like, they don't care. There's no, I guess, hoarding state secrets to try to maintain a competitive advantage. And I think that is where the sport is heading in general, because I think it ultimately doesn't matter. And I think the transparency just in general, I think it just makes the sport better. I mean, obviously it makes it better for people like you who are covering the team, but I think it makes it better for fans too. I think everyone, wants transparency. I think the advantage you gain from being transparent with people is certainly bigger than any advantage you gain from, a team not knowing what Dallas Wilson's specific issue is. Obviously, that's not the best example because we know what Dallas Wilson's issue is. It's still something he's recovering from last year. But I think point being, that makes a lot of sense. But going to the scheme, yeah, I mean, that's, to me, I think, the biggest question. And I don't think there's a lot you're going to be able to take away. I don't think you're going to be able to take away, we'll get into this too. Like, they're not going to name a starting quarterback after the spring game. That just ain't going to happen. I don't think you're going to know, what, who's going to be, whether it's Philo or Tramel Jones, like, who's going to be their preferred target. I don't think we're going to know that either. But I think we might have a pretty clear picture of what this offense is going to look like just from the spring game and the clips we're able to, what media is able to see. And obviously interested to see, like, once they get more into it, how much of that they let you guys see, like how much team drill stuff they let you guys see. I guess that sort of remains to be seen. But I think that is a pretty big question just because of kind of the versatility in Buster Faulkner's background. I mean, he's done it all. I mean, he was obviously not a play caller, but coaching quarterbacks at Georgia, which was, the Todd Monken system. That was as pro style as it gets at the college level. And then obviously his background, coaching, at tried and true air raid programs. And obviously at Georgia Tech, they ran kind of I would say an offense that's kind of, unique to his, it's something he's never really run anywhere else in his entire career. That sort of quarterback run driven, I guess sort of pro style, but spread quarterback run elements too. And I don't think you're going to see that necessarily because of personnel, but point being, I think there was a lot of directions this could go offensively this year. But I think we'll have a pretty clear picture. And, I would probably lean towards something more pro style just because, like you said, take advantage of Ball while he's here. I think no matter who wins the quarterback competition, I think that's going to be the better fit for their abilities. I think both quarterbacks would kind of benefit more from a system like that. Again, I don't think we're going to know like how run heavy, how pass heavy they want to be necessarily. I mean, I'd assume in the spring game, certainly you're going to see more passing than running because, first of all, I mean, I think you didn't even Summerall say like, you're not going to see a ton of Jaden Baugh because like we know what we got in Jaden Baugh.
Yeah, he said the same thing about Miles Graham, who was also kind of just like being held out. He had a shoulder operation, some sort of cleanup, and they were like, he said, "We know what we have in Miles. We're
Yeah.
not concerned about him getting playing time in spring that much."
Yeah.
But again, it's not that he's not going to, and they're being transparent. I mean, it's avoiding the nightmare we had last year. I mean, like, let's address the elephant in the room. Like, how DJ Lagway's situation was handled last offseason was terrible. It was
Awful.
horrible. Everybody knew it. It was the worst kept secret ever that he was hurt or that something happened. And then just acting like nothing happened. Oh, he's fine. He's taking mental reps. I'm glad that worked out.
Yeah.
It was a nightmare. You have to understand, okay, guys get hurt, but like you have to plan around that and figure it out instead of just being like, nope, everything's fine while everything's imploding around you. But yeah, like you said, the offense, I think, like you said, the pro style will be a better fit for whoever um, ends up being the quarterback. We've said multiple times, it's probably going to be Aaron Philo. We're not going to know that, like we said, but that's my guess. But pro style definitely like take some pressure off your inexperienced quarterback and get the ball in space to your playmakers, figure that out. And speaking of those playmakers, some of the other things we might be able to kind of like discern from spring practice is, especially at the wide receiver position. We talked about last week how loaded that group is, but that there is kind of this big three starting unit of Vernell Brown, who's now wearing number 1, Dallas Wilson, and Eric Singleton. But who will emerge behind those guys? We might start to get a little bit of an indication during spring practice. I think that obviously we talked last week. I think Bailey Stockton is a guy just because of his familiarity with Aaron Philo and with the system, whatever kind of system it is, like understanding the terminology, understanding what Buster Faulkner kind of wants in a wide receiver. But I wouldn't count out any of these freshmen, any of the talented freshmen that came in last year, and to have kind of like a spring like Vernell Brown and Dallas Wilson had last spring.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the freshmen are interesting candidates there. I think the transfers are too. Like between guys like obviously Stockton, Micah Mays, Jalen Lloyd, who we all talked about last week. I think this is, I think, a real opportunity where you could see, especially with Dallas Wilson at least not repping at the moment. I think this is an opportunity where you could really see like a spring darling emerge. Like it seems like every year there's like an offensive spring darling. I don't know if you could say VB3 and Dallas counted as that just because they had such um, they were such highly anticipated players. It's not like they came out of nowhere. But I think this is a spot where you could kind of see like just who's the guy that people are talking about. If they're if the consistent take is like, wow, man, Bailey Stockton looks good out there. Like, hey, I know he didn't really play last year, but Jalen Lloyd like looks like he's really come along in terms of his fundamentals. Like whether whatever it is, or hey man, like Davian Gross doesn't look like a true freshman right now. Like he's out there doing making things happen. So I think regardless of how that exactly plays out, I think you could have a better idea because I think, I mean, at least speaking for myself, I like the pieces in Florida's receiver room. I just don't know how they're actually all going to fit together. I mean, with all these transfers you took, like, are those guys just are those just warm bodies? Are they depth? Do you have like a defined role in mind I mean, obviously not, you're not going to have that for all of them, but like, I'm just curious to see how that looks. And I think that is something where we'll have an idea, just based on, spring game usage and just, again, what, the media and we as fans are able to glean from, the bits of practice we are able to see. But I think, going back to the quarterback thing, whoever's throwing them the ball, obviously they're not going to, like we said, they're not going to name a starter in spring. They probably, if I had to, put money on it, I'd say they're probably not naming a starter until like mid-August, a couple weeks before the season. I don't think there's any reason to not let it draw out that long, unless it really is just that much of a done deal. But I think unless it's really tight, like really tight as in they genuinely don't know going into the fall who it's going to be, I think we'll have a pretty clear picture after the spring. Again, just, by who's getting the first team reps, by kind of how spring game usage looks for both of them. And just obviously it's quarterback. You can kind of see with your own two eyes how guys are looking, so they won't say anything. And again, I think if it is Philo, I think that'll become clear, especially just because he kind of already is viewed as the leader in the clubhouse there, just because of his familiarity with the system and the staff. So I think if you kind of just see him getting those opportunities, that you would think would be afforded to the likely, starter, I think you can kind of obviously start to make some assumptions at that point. But we may not get there. I mean, it really depends on how close really Trammell is in that battle.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely like a interesting battle because they both have their advantages, like we've mentioned, and I think they both have shown in limited flashes that they can be productive. But no matter who it is, like I think we will, like you said, have a better sense of what the offense is going to look like. Uh, at the running back spot, I think we're going to get a pretty good feel of like behind Jaden Ball because we're probably not going to see that much of him. Like, who's going to be that back behind him? I think it's probably going to be Evan Pryor, just based on his skill set, his speed, and also his production. But like we talked a couple weeks ago about London Montgomery and about Duke Clark as guys that could have a role. And I think it's always good to rotate running backs and also at the tight end spot, which we're obviously going to go into in a little bit here, with that being our in our positional previews. There's like 5 tight ends on this roster, and I think they might all play, at least in some role. We'll go into Hezzy Kent a little later because you talk about spring standout. I mean, it's hard not to like just look at that guy and be like, what is this 300-pound dude running routes? It's very jarring. I've never seen anything like that. And, he's just a freak, and we'll go into that. But what the role of the tight ends is going to look like, I think we're going to get a better feel just based on the offense. I think a lot of 12 personnel would make sense on some downs, but then also I wouldn't be surprised to see some 4 receiver sets. I think it's really going to be a very varied offense with a lot of different dynamics because you have all these players with these unique skill sets. So put them in situations where you're scheming guys the ball, and it's not just, okay, let's call this play and figure it out. Like, know what the purpose of the play is. I think that's something that Florida has been missing offensively. It was like, all right, let's just run a screen because we should run a screen. No, like run the play because you feel like it's going to work. So I'm interested to see that go forward. I mean, I think we're going to see a better offense this season by Florida, even not even depending on who the quarterback is. I just think schematically, it's just going to be a better fit.
Yeah, totally. And I think, when you talk about the running backs and receivers, like I think their position groups, like I said, we feel good about. It's just we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. But I wouldn't say those are questions we have, but I wouldn't say they're question marks. Unfortunately, I do think that in terms of like what we maybe probably won't learn, I think does include most of the bigger actual question marks, that this team's going to face coming into this year. I think first and foremost, my biggest question about this team, and something that I just don't think spring practice can really tell you, or fall camp for that matter, can really tell you, is the trenches, both offensive and defensive. I think there's a lot of questions there. Florida losing obviously multiple starters on the offensive line. I don't think there's a clear 5 necessarily right now. I mean, I think there's a there's probably 7-ish guys, maybe 8 guys battling for those 5 spots right now. But what that rotation looks like and just how much depth, how deep it goes, how much they actually believe in the depth they have there, because Summerall has been pretty transparent about saying that he would have liked to have added more depth, particularly on the defensive line, which I think is the bigger question, because I think it's just the area where Florida doesn't necessarily have as much proven talent from the get-go. Probably hard to argue, other than Emmanuel in the inside, that they got a lot better this offseason in that regard. I mean, especially because they're taking a couple losses. I think that's a major question. And then I would also say, my other questions are in the secondary, where I think there's going to be a couple guys starting who haven't really answered questions. And again, I don't think spring will tell you that, because I think, especially looking at defense, obviously the best look we get at all these guys is a spring game. And spring games just tend to be more geared toward offense. Defensive guys aren't necessarily going at full speed. They kind of want to set the offense up for success. You're certainly not going to get guys playing like full season speed and strength, in season speed and strength on the offensive and defensive lines. So I don't know if these are questions we're going to have answered. Like, I think we might get really excited about the way some of these skill position guys and just the way the offense in general looks in the spring. And that's great. And I think, that could be enough to give Florida at least a pretty high floor this year. But I think the biggest questions about, like, can this team actually be like a CFP contender this year? That, I think, is really going to come down to the offensive and defensive trenches. And we just won't know, I don't think.
Yeah. In terms of the offensive line, I mean, maybe outside of like center, I think Harrison Moore probably starts at center. Again, I used probably, though.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee on this offensive line. You would like to think maybe the Penn State guys have also a little bit of an advantage, just because
At least Shanahan. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, they have that experience with Phil Troutwine. And on the defensive front, I was very encouraged to see Joseph Mbachu put on a little more weight. I think he's now physically in the spot where he's going to have a really good season at 6'5", 323, like filling out his frame more. I'm interested to see him alongside, Emmanuel, Brendan Bett, Jeremiah McLeod. Those you're relying a lot on those guys, though. I mean, we'll go into that in a couple of weeks, but you're putting a lot of faith in that younger defensive front and kind of figuring out what their roles are going to be. And then in the secondary, I think more injury wise, Florida secondary was bit a lot last season. We're still seeing Dijon Johnson still recovering. Cormani McLean ended up avoiding that, what looked to be a really major injury, and he's out there. But like Javari Flowers, Ben Hanks, going to be probably put in bigger roles this season. And then in the safety room, outside of Bryce Thornton, Florida went the portal route, and then like the star position too, like, which they want to run. I think a guy who might stand out a little bit is Kanye Clark from UCLA, a very versatile player that like Florida's coaching staff really liked. And I think he's in the driver's seat for a starting role on this team. But like, what if someone gets hurt? Like, are we going to see Drake Stubbs and Lagonza Hayward? We saw a little bit of Alfonso Allen. He was good in limited reps last season. So outside of Bryce Thornton and outside of, barring health, those two established corners, what is this room going to look like? It's definitely question marks that we might get small answers, but we're really not going to know until it's game time.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And those are just things that, until you get into real games and truly like real SEC games, like the Auburn game in week 3 is really the first time I think you're going to have an idea of where you're at there. When you say Clark is maybe in the driver's seat for starting spot, are you saying at nickel, do you think? Or do you think?
Yeah, like, I think it's going to be interesting to see, like what kind of back they're running. Cause like, it's like more of like a nickel-ish role, I would say, but he also played some box at UCLA too. So I think like they're going to try and kind of move him around a little bit, because he's listed at star on Florida's roster, with him, Elijah Owens, and Dylan Purder are the 3 players listed at star. So I think DJ Coleman might also play some nickel. We saw Lagonza play a little nickel last year. So I think those guys will all kind of be rotating in there. So definitely some question marks, though, outside of, really, with both corners, are they going to be healthy? You'd like to think so, but they both had season-ending injuries last year. So outside of Bryce Thornton, it's like kind of like a lot of unproven. So, yeah, I mean, Thornton's going to be the leader of that secondary. He got number one for a
Yep.
reason, too. It's really him and Miles Graham and like Jaden Woods to an extent defensively that are going to be tasked with these roles of being leaders. For like a Jaden Woods, that's pretty new for him. Obviously, he had like Tyreek Sapp and George Gums in the room, but we kind of saw Bryce and Miles especially step up into those leadership roles last season as guys, those guys that they'd send out to talk to the media after tough losses. Once you
Yeah.
get to that standpoint, that's a leader of the team. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, talking about Clark, like I think, Florida's seen the value of a even if he is a more of a depth piece, the value of a versatile depth piece like that. I mean, just think about the impact that like Triquez Bridges made a couple years ago. I mean, that, a guy who came in and had to start a lot of games down the stretch and kind of could play anywhere they needed him to, just like a Swiss Army knife on the defense. So yeah, I mean, I think that's really valuable. So, curious to see. And I think we might have maybe an idea about like, I think we'll have an idea probably after spring where like the starting group is trending, but I'm not sure we're going to know whether it's a strength, whether it's a weakness, whether it's something in between. I think that much will still remain to be determined. But yeah, we can continue on talking about spring practice and just, this, where the roster's at in general, because we'll continue our positional previews like we talked about a few minutes ago, looking at the tight end position, which I mean is fascinating because, we've talked about quarterback, running back, and receiver so far. I think all three of those rooms, varying degree of cautiously optimistic to exceedingly optimistic. I don't know what to make of this tight end room. I mean, it's been rough for a while now. It was pretty much rough throughout the Billy Napier tenure. It was probably the single biggest position, in the lack of development and recruiting was, maybe the biggest indictment anywhere on the roster of the coaching staff, especially because of their insistence on running so much 12 personnel. I expect to see less of that, although not none of that this year. And I think, so that might diminish the importance of this position a bit, but obviously a lot of new faces here because Hayden Hansen now plays for Oklahoma, who, we'll see how that works out for him. But I mean, a guy that kind of got maligned a lot by fans, but ended up having obviously pretty decent value on the portal market. And I'm not sure it's, he was solid enough that I'm not sure it's like a given you're going to be upgrading there this year. But I think some interesting pieces, obviously the headliner being Amir Jackson, who you were able to retain and not lose to the portal as you did with Hayden Hansen and Tony Livingston. But outside of him, a lot of question marks, and obviously even some question marks with him.
yeah, I mean, I'll start with the biggest question mark, which like Evan McKissick was kind of an outside hire. I mean, obviously a guy John Summerall has a lot of experience with at Troy and at Tulane, but he was the offensive line coach at Tulane last year. I think that kind of speaks a little bit to like the direction of this tight end group. I mean, you have to be able to block if you're going to get playing time on this group. Just straight up, you have to be a good blocker. They want guys who are going like, if anything else, they want guys who are going to block. So are any of these guys going to put up Kyle Pitts numbers? No, I mean that's just not the role of the tight end probably in this offense, and there's not a player, that's that explosive. I mean, there could be, and we'll talk about that, or explosive in a different way.
Yeah.
But I think you're looking at Amir Jackson and Luke Hartbring, the Georgia Tech transfer, as kind of your two guys who I think will probably trade off playing time, maybe see the field together at points. Evan McKissick said he had recruited Amir previously, and then like kind of in the process of convincing him to come back, like he's been really mentally getting better, understanding like what the expectation is, how to understand the position a little more. And like it was interesting in the wording of kind of how like Evan McKissick said it. Like he's like, we got some other pieces around him that are going to help him compete. To me, that reads like, okay, they think he might be the guy, like the lead guy. They want other guys around him competing. And obviously there's no guarantees, but I think he wouldn't have stayed if there wasn't really an avenue to where he was going to be a part of this offense. And we really haven't seen much production wise, but when we did see him, I thought he looked good. He's obviously a good athlete. He's shown he can block. Um, like I've said a couple times, develops well in the video game. I don't know what correlation that has, but then compared to like Luke Harpring, um, you know, he's gotten a little bigger in terms of weight, which is good. They wanted him to do that, and the offense isn't going to be the exact same that it was under Georgia Tech, but he has that familiarity with Buster Faulkner and some with Aaron Philo, and he played through an injury to play in the bowl game last year, which spoke a lot about his toughness. So I could definitely see him also being involved. So I really think it's between those two. Not to say that there's not guys behind them that will see the field, but I would say those are probably your two primary tight ends. But kind of like at quarterback, you've got the incumbent Florida guy who's barely played and the Georgia Tech guy who might know the system. But unlike that one, I'd actually lean probably Amir Jackson as like the lead guy here as of right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is interesting because he's been, he was a slightly less productive, or not really slightly, like decently less productive one last year between the two. But I mean, I think it's important to remember that while these guys are both, pretty much, open-ended questions, I don't think we really know much about either of them. They both were redshirt freshmen last year. So, they're young and there's a lot of room to, I think, still develop. Harpring had some interesting game, had like a productive game. Like his best game was against NC State. He had 4 catches for 51 yards in that game, a loss actually for Georgia Tech. So, I mean, he had a 3-catch, 39-yard game, finished the year with 13 catches for 158 yards. So, like, I mean, for a reserve true freshman tight end, it's not, there's not production to scoff at. Amir Jackson only had, I think, 3 catches last year. But so, yeah, but I think Jackson, I mean, obviously they think pretty highly of him if they fought to retain him because they went portal heavy in the tight end room regardless. They brought in 3 guys, I think. So, that was obviously a point of emphasis for them. Yeah, they did bring in 3 guys. So that was a point of emphasis for them, obviously. But they still wanted to keep Amir Jackson around. And I think he's shown enough. I think it's promising, but I can't, even taking the most optimistic read of it, I can't tell you I feel great about the top end of this tight end group just because it's largely unproven.
Yeah. I mean, one funny thing about Amir and Luke is if you look at 247's rankings from that 2024 class at tight end, Amir's number 8 and Luke's number 9. So they were viewed pretty similarly in terms of recruit rating. Now they're both in the same program competing. But behind them, like you said, Lakota Dipre, who his older brother CJ is an NFL tight end, and he played at JMU last year. Was utilized in a lot of different ways, also on special teams. I think a core special teamer here as well. But he was semi-productive, obviously nothing too crazy, but he showed he could catch the ball. They also brought in Evan Chieka. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Chieka, small school guy. So, just kind of a shot. University of New Haven.
Which is their FCS. This was their first year transitioning up from Division II.
Yeah. But he had 31 catches and 4 touchdowns last year. I mean, obviously
second team all conference player, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So a guy who has caught the ball and has played tight end. So a guy with some experience. It might not be SEC football, but you've got to take chances on guys at the end of the day. And, he's not coming in and immediately being like, okay, this is the guy, but he's a bigger dude. What's that? 257 in terms of weight. So definitely like an interesting kind of guy, 6'5". So we're talking like good size here. So another guy who might be an interesting project. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the two of them see the field at points, and kind of rotate in, especially like in 12 personnel, if that is an avenue where Florida's going to try and run some 12 personnel, um, give some of the receivers a breather a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the interesting thing is how much 12 personnel do we see and just kind of what those roles look like? Because, like you said, I think they're kind of I think kind of a specific archetype they are looking for. Like you said, you have to be able to block if you're going to play on this team. I think obviously with Evans, yeah, is it Siaka? Is that how?
Let's see if
Wait,
they
how is
put
this
in the.
spelled?
I don't even think they
Oh,
put in
Chieka? I don't know.
Chieka.
I don't know.
We're sorry. We're sorry, Evan.
Yeah, we apologize, Evan, for butchering. But no, I mean, I think he's an interesting guy. I mean, we'll see. Obviously, kind of has some vertical potential, but also with his size, curious to see how that translates to blocking in the SEC. Obviously, that's a huge leap going from low level FCS to FCS football in the Northeast to the SEC is quite a jump. But I mean, I think it's interesting, and I think you have four guys who I think can have roles. I don't know how good any of them are. I don't know if the ceiling with this position group is particularly high, but I think you have some options here that makes things interesting. I say you have four guys who I think can have a role. There's a fifth guy. I'm not sure at this exact moment in time if I believe he can have a role. I mean, you might have seen it, and you probably saw it in person, Max. I mean, the clip I saw on Twitter of Hezzy Kent running routes on air. I don't know about this one. I don't know about this one, man.
It was jarring.
Yeah. I mean, it's not bad. Like his ball skills are. I mean, he moves for a guy of his size, but like, I don't know if that's going to be good enough to play in the SEC.
Yeah, like, I mean, Florida seemingly thinks he could stay at tight end.
Yeah. They're not humoring him in this. Like, this seems like a genuine, like, steadfast belief that they have that he can do it.
And, like, I think at worst, like, you've got something interesting, like some sort of, like, mismatch puzzle piece. This is a guy who is listed right now as 6'6", 313. So to put that in perspective, if you look at our offensive line, right, he's weight-wise bigger than half of them. So, I mean, obviously you're kind of like, okay, like, is he just going to be an offensive lineman? But they recruited him as a tight end. He's listed as a tight end. Evan McKissick said, like, he's getting extra cardio, like he's being accountable about his weight.
I bet.
Like they want him to get like to like 290 is kind of where they're like hoping.
That's the target. The target right now, is just under 300.
Right now, yes. I think it's listen, I mean, put him out there a little bit.
I mean, try it against Campbell. Sure. Why not? Like,
he was a 4-star. Obviously, athletically, I mean,
his high school film is legendary. I mean, there's no doubt about it. His high school film is something. I mean, I'm not saying I think it translates, but there's something there. There's no doubt there's something there.
And if you look at the video of him running the route, right? Like, he's obviously not moving crazy off the ball, but he goes and he high points that football.
He does. And it's not like guys run those full speed most of the time anyway.
No, but he goes up. He can jump for that size.
Yeah.
So, like, it's kind of funny. You know how, like, Detroit will, like, they put Dan Skipper out there and have him, like, as their 6th offensive lineman and have him, like, sneak off. I mean, this guy would fit in the offensive line room. I don't think anybody would bat an eye. And obviously he could catch the football. It just adds another element. Could he tackle? We could see that. I'm looking at this video of Trammell, hitting him a little deep, good hands. He's cat. Oh, here's a throw from Aaron Philo on this one. So, he's off the off the bag. He's getting up there. He's
I mean, he's
blocking.
an impressive athlete. There's no doubt about it. He's an impressive
Yeah,
athlete.
he's interesting. Dylan Olive did a story on him, kind of about how like they think he could stick at tight end. But I said this: get good athletes in the room, and like big guys, and like you've got. Think about how many spots you've got on your roster. Like, might as well. You've got a guy here who could be. Imagine he like is like 275. Like
if only he were to lose 35 pounds.
Yeah, 35, 40 pounds. I'm not saying it will happen, but there's a chance. It's not going to be a day one thing, and that's fine. This isn't a guy you bring in with the intention of playing day one. But like I said, video game guy here, he will see the field day one in the video game. That's for sure.
He's like a player that in like year 4 of a dynasty and you go into position changes and realize, oh, wait, this 5-star offensive tackle is actually an 87 overall tight end right off the bat or something.
Yeah, and like, he's a blocker. but we've talked about, like Evan McKissick made it clear. He said, you've got to be able to block, you have to protect, and you have to be able to run around. So, but he started with block. Hezekiah could probably block. I mean, at that size, you would think he could play some offensive line. I mean, that's a position that people have projected him at. And because of the athlete he is and the explosiveness he has, he could project as a good offensive lineman. If we've seen Phil Troutwine take 0 stars into first-round picks. I mean, this guy physically is a crazy athlete. So I wouldn't be surprised at all. Obviously, like, I think he'd be fun at tight end, but realistically, like, I would be pretty surprised if this isn't an offensive lineman going forward. But never say never. I'm just saying not likely.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's where his future is. And I think there's potentially a good future there for him. Like, I think he will be a player who makes an impact on this team. Not sure it's going to be at tight end, but I think in year 1, I think you kind of made an interesting point that I hadn't even really considered, is that at the very least, he just opens up some interesting like schematic avenues for Buster Faulkner, whether you're using him as kind of an extra offensive lineman in there essentially, or just, leaving that kind of open-ended because he could go out there and run a route if he needs to. I think he could see the field this year in that kind of way. Like, I don't think he's going to be a guy you see on the field all the time in like a normal tight end role, but I think there could be packages because again, he's just such a unique talent that I have to imagine between, the minds they have in that on that staff that they can figure out a way to make it work. But long term, I'd say he probably projects as an offensive lineman and, like, frankly, as a pretty good one. But obviously, probably not going to make an impact there this year either way. I don't know if slimming down a ton is necessarily the move, if that's where they see him playing in the long term. But I mean, for now, I think it's just going to be interesting to see because I think he will primarily be a tight end this year. How much he plays is up to, because again, he's not, even if he's doing some reps at offensive line, he's not going to see the field at offensive tackle this year, I don't think. So, I think if you see him, you're going to see him in some sort of tight end-ish, even if it's like maybe even like an H-back, or like you could get crazy and do the kind of things that like Ole Miss was doing with JJ Pegues. Like, I don't know, like, but just get it, get creative with it. I think that's maybe how you could see him this year. I don't think you see him, lining up at tight end and running a bunch of like downfield routes. I think that's going to be more reserved for Amir Jackson, Harpring, and maybe the other 2 transfers.
Yeah, I think like this might be like a fullback in ways.
Yeah,
too,
like an H-back kind of stuff. Like, I could totally see that for him.
I think that could be interesting. And again, you've got a guy that's 6'6", 313 and looks like a ball
and can move.
Can move.
I don't know if he can move well enough to be an SEC tight end, but he certainly moves much better than your replacement level SEC offensive lineman. of a
for
similar
sure.
size. So
So there's something.
yeah,
Obviously, and listen, if anybody's going to turn this guy into a good offensive lineman, Phil Troutline is that guy.
yeah.
I know we're talking tight end, but looking at the future. So, like you said, this tight end group, kind of like, I guess the closest room you could say to it that we've talked about so far is quarterback, because there is that level of uncertainty, and we kind of have an idea of how they're going to be used. Just if you kind of look at like how, obviously, like, I wouldn't want to use Brock Bowers as the example. Like at Georgia, that was a little bit of a
Mhm.
different situation. But outside of that, where, it's very rare a tight end is like your leading pass catcher, especially in the SEC. It's it's more, you need guys that could block, and guys that have safe hands and can make the big catch when you need them and be a safety blanket. So, you've got a lot of size in this room, maybe not a lot of experience, but some experience, more experience than you have at quarterback. And I think it will be pretty fascinating to see who ends up stepping up into that role, and how they get used, what kind of role they're actually going to have in the offense when it comes to game time. Because really, we haven't seen tight ends be, like you said at the beginning of the segment, be that crucial role in Florida's offense, especially under the last staff. And I don't know if crucial is the word, but I would say maybe more of an importance on all the aspects of being a tight end, and refocusing kind of the mentality offensively of the role the tight end will play uh, under this staff.
Yeah, I think it's going to be much more geared toward the personnel. Whereas, Billy, I think Billy's offense was just very much, we're going to run a certain style. We're going to run a lot of 12 personnel. And even if the personnel itself doesn't really fit that, plan, we're going to do it. And we're going to throw the ball to Hayden Hansen a ton. And it didn't make a lot of sense. I think you're going to see more coherent tight end usage this year. But is it a strength? Is it a weakness? I don't know. I'd probably say it's somewhere in between. Like I don't think this is going to be like a group that's holding back the offense. I'd also probably say I don't think there's like a game changing talent in this room right now. I mean, obviously Brock Bowers is the worst comparison because he's like about as game changing a talent as you're ever going to find at a tight end. But like someone that's more of that caliber, we've seen a few of them around college. I mean, Florida had one in Kyle Pitts a few years back. I don't think we've got that. I also think it's a more interesting collection of talent than what Florida was working with under Billy Napier.
I'd agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was interesting. Obviously, we're almost done with the offense. We'll get into the offensive line next week. Not sure. We'll have to talk about whether we would rather do it as just offensive tackles and then interior guys or all at once. I'd say probably looking at all at once, but we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I mean, obviously really interesting. Going to be a lot more actual football to talk about now that we've got actual spring practice going on, actual guys getting out on the field. And again, we talked about. I'm not sure how much we'll be able to learn, but we'll certainly just have a clearer picture because with the new staff, this is just always tricky. You just don't really know what to expect. And I mean, we're not really going to know until Florida takes the field against Florida Atlantic on September, whatever. But I think, or maybe it's August this year, whatever. Doesn't matter. But either way, I think like we're just going to have a better picture of, I think, where some of the strengths are on this roster, where some of the weaknesses are, and maybe a sneak peek at guys who maybe we're not giving a ton of airtime to in these position by position previews, but are going to kind of earn their way out onto the field this spring. And with so many new pieces, whether it's high school guys or the many transfers that they took, I think you're likely to see that just because there was so much turnover this offseason.
Absolutely. I think we're looking at a new look program here. I mean, obviously some guys sticking around, but more than half the team pretty much is new faces. So it'll definitely be an interesting spring ball. One of the more interesting spring balls we've had in a really long time.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. I'm excited to see it progress. I'm excited to see what your insights are from being there on the ground in the building, Max. I'm curious to see what your observations and just general takeaways are. But yeah, it's going to be a fun few weeks here as we get into spring ball, and then hope they haven't. They confirmed a spring game. I'm not sure they've confirmed a televised spring game. So
Yeah, no word on that, but they've confirmed a spring game. And yeah, but some other news right now. Florida A&M has tied this up at 5.
oh, so Florida actually tied it up at 5. Gators were
Oh
down
yes, they
5-0.
just did, but
Yeah.
uh, it's bases loaded right now for the Gators. And then in terms of non-Gator but SEC basketball, Arkansas has rebounded tonight. They are crushing
Ooh, I forgot
Texas
about
as we speak.
Oh, what's the score
Um,
there? I forgot about that game.
83-59
Oh my
currently.
god. Okay.
And Darius Acuff with 25 and 9. So
I mean, that's a red hot team that Florida just absolutely just pounced on Saturday, and
yeah,
seems like they're back to being dominant again.
so yeah, definitely. This time next week we'll be, you know, gearing up for Nashville, like right before that starts or day of that starting. So we'll get some thoughts on that and what the bracket will kind of look like in terms
Are
of
you going?
Florida's. I am not
Okay.
going to Nashville, but uh, my co-editor is. But I was like, it's spring break. I am though going to Tampa no matter what, even if the Gators
Nice.
aren't playing. So I will be there for the first round, and if the Gators are playing, that'd be awesome. But if not, cool to just watch some March Madness. It's like the most awesome thing ever, of course. Especially when the Gators are good and you're looking into it. So definitely an intriguing time right now for just all of Gator sports, and especially it's March. It's like the best month of the year.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, that'll be fun in Tampa either way. I think it's pretty safe to say Florida's going to be playing there. I went in 2014, the year Florida was the number 1 overall seed. First 2 rounds were in Orlando. I went with my dad and my grandpa. It was a lot of fun. It was a seminal memory there. So that was a lot of fun. And yeah, basketball, when the Gators are good and it's in the tournament, there's really nothing better than March Madness, and we're almost there. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Um, but with that, we appreciate everyone who tuned in tonight live, everyone who's watching it after the fact. We appreciate you watching, engaging. Please remember to like, subscribe, keep an eye out. We'll be back next week. Should be at 7. We should be back at our normal time again, like we were today, 7 p.m. Eastern next week. We really just appreciate you guys watching. So we'll see you next time.